All right, so I'm fully aware that whatever I say in this video, somebody's not going to be happy with me. There's going to be somebody who gets mad, and there's really just no winning for me in this video because there are so many varying opinions about emulation and whether or not it's good or bad. But regardless of what sides you sit on, I do encourage people to have an open discussion about it because what's happening right now is very important for the game industry and how we move forward. Again, there are very passionate opinions on both sides of the matter. I do completely understand that. But thanks to a recent development, this conversation has kind of exploded online. Of course, I'm talking about Nintendo suing the popular Switch emulator by the name of Yuzu. And this is actually a very important lawsuit for gaming because whatever happens could be the beginning of a domino effect. Theoretically, if Nintendo wins, this could circumvent third-party emulation across all platforms. And I think that's what Nintendo is trying to achieve here. They're using this lawsuit as a future deterrent. We'll, of course, get into that here in a little bit. Now, we do have a few other things to talk about as well, including a PlayStation studio that reportedly was almost shut down as a part of the layoffs just yesterday. So do stay tuned for all of that as well, but yeah, let's just go and get right into this emulation situation. So yes, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Yuzu, and based on the public filing, they apparently have been building this case for quite some time. Like, the thing about emulators is that it is kind of this gray area. Emulators themselves are not necessarily illegal as long as they don't use source code, which Yuzu doesn't. The problem that companies like Nintendo have with these emulators, though, is that a lot of people download them and then play ROMs that are illegally obtained. That is the crux of this entire issue, and instead of targeting ROM websites, it seems like Nintendo is just trying to more or less cut the head off the snake. You can't play these ROMs if you don't have an emulator. And while okay, it's probably a little too late to completely stop Switch emulation, it's open source and it's already out there and it'll be shared online one way or the other. But again, I think what Nintendo is trying to do here is that they're using this lawsuit as some kind of deterrent. They're more or less putting the emulation community on notice, and they're saying, hey, if you mess with our active hardware, such as the future Switch successor, we're going to come after you. So I've seen a lot of people just kind of assume that this is about the current Switch and older hardware, and while okay, that might partially be true, I'm sure Nintendo doesn't like that either. But I think the bigger thing for Nintendo is protecting their current active hardware, including the Switch successor. I mean, if you look at the timing of this lawsuit, it's rather interesting. It's happening just ahead of the Switch successor, and they don't want another generation where people pirate their games on an active console. And while I am a supporter of emulation as a whole, I think it's important for game preservation, and truthfully, the emulation community as a whole has helped a lot of games survive in the modern era of gaming. The emulation community is absolutely important because they do a lot of what these platform holders just won't. But at the same time, when you're talking about an active console, that's where I think the line becomes a lot more gray. Because then you have people who are pirating games that just released. Now, some of these people do actually buy their Switch games and they dump them on PC because they just want better hardware than what they have with the current Nintendo Switch. You know, the Nintendo Switch does have steep limitations. But the fact is that a lot of people don't obtain those games legally, and that's what Nintendo is looking at. Nintendo is attempting to build a case that targets that fine line, and their prime example of this was Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. If you remember right, it broke street date, and somebody dumped it online before its official release. And apparently Nintendo was tracking that situation very closely. They tracked social media and what people were saying about it. Some people were complaining about things like spoilers, and they also mentioned that Tears of the Kingdom was pirated 1 million times before even official released. And they claim that Yuzu is secondarily liable. You can see their claim here, which reads, many of the pirate websites specifically noted the ability to play the game file in Yuzu. Defendant's development and distribution of Yuzu to the public materially contributes to and induces those third parties to infringe the copyrights in Nintendo's games. Defendant is thus secondarily liable for the infringement committed by the users to whom it distributes Yuzu. Now, I don't think Nintendo necessarily has a major case based on this specific claim, just because of how the law works. That's really always been a safety blanket for the emulation community. They can provide emulators just so long as they don't provide those illegal games. But what Nintendo's trying to say here goes a little bit beyond that, because what they're saying is that Yuzu is making it easy to access those games. They actually brought up encryption, and you can see here where they said the lead developer of Yuzu, known online under the alias Bunny, has publicly acknowledged most users' pirate product keys in games online, and Yuzu's website provides instructions for its users telling them how to unlawfully hack their own Nintendo Switch and how to make unauthorized copies of Nintendo games and unlawfully obtain product keys. Only because Yuzu decrypts a Nintendo Switch game file dynamically during operation can the game be played in Yuzu. In other words, without Yuzu's decryption of Nintendo's encryption, unauthorized copies of games could not be played on PCs or Android devices. They also brought up the fact that Yuzu developers gets paid a lot of money through Patreon, where they get $30,000 a month, and that money would theoretically encourage them to help others illegally play games. So why is all of this important to their case? Well, what it all kind of boils down to is aiding and abetting. In other words, by law, anyone who knowingly helps someone else perform a crime is also guilty. Somebody else might have pulled the trigger, but if you helped them, you're also guilty. Or in this case, Nintendo's claiming that Yuzu helped others illegally obtain their games. Now, that law might not apply in a case like this, but that kind of seems to be the logic that Nintendo is using. They believe they're guilty by assisting. So that seems to be how Nintendo is building this specific case, which, under the right judge, this case might not necessarily be dead in the water like some people are assuming. Some people believe Nintendo's trying to bury them in legal fees, and okay, that might be a part of their plan, but the way they phrase this case, I wouldn't be surprised if a judge actually takes a look at this and says, okay, I'm listening. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to win, but I could see a judge at least looking further into this situation. So I don't think this case is just as cut and dry as what some people believe, and it might be worth paying attention to. I don't know, though. Like I said before, I am a supporter of emulation, not necessarily so much for current hardware, but definitely for retro hardware. I think emulation is very important for the game community. But let me know what you all think about all of this in the comments below. Do you think Nintendo has a case, or do you think that they're just being ridiculous? Also, how do you feel about emulation? Do you think it's wrong? Do you think it's right? Give me your thoughts in the comments below, because I do understand that there is widely varying opinions on this topic. Okay, moving on, though, of course, we talked about the PlayStation layoffs yesterday. That's never a fun topic to talk about. And what made it even worse was the studio closure for London Studio. Sadly, though, it's also been discovered that might not necessarily have been the only studio that Sony was thinking about closing. Reportedly, they were considering one other studio, and this is more of a household name, being Media Molecule, the studio behind the ever-beloved Little Big Planet. They were a huge part of the PlayStation 3 generation, and they were one of the studios that helped the PS3 bounce back from a very rough early start. Everybody remembers the infamous $600 PS3 launch, but great games like Little Big Planet helped get them back on track. Media Molecule, though, since then has kind of struggled. They launched Tearaway for the Vita and later ported it to the PS4. I thought it was a good game, but it didn't necessarily have the same success as Little Big Planet. And their situation only got worse with Dreams. That was a game that was supposed to last 10 years, but instead it shut down, I believe, last year. Why that game never came to PC is beyond me. I think that game would have fit perfectly with the PC user base, but nonetheless, their struggles are very well documented, and it does appear that Sony was considering a complete shutdown as a part of the layoffs. This is coming from the senior editor over at Kotaku, and this is what he said. Over the holiday break, a source told me that London Studio and Media Molecule were highest on the list of possible closures. I reached out to dozens across both studios to see if anyone had heard anything, but no one who responded had. So you can kind of take this story as you will, but based on their struggles, and that's been pretty public, this doesn't really seem out of the realms of possibility. And I hate to say that, because I am a big fan of Media Molecule. I would personally be devastated if they closed. And right now, with this report, I can only imagine how they're feeling. I'm sure there's a lot of internal pressure to make their next game great, because it might end up being their last chance if they don't end up finding success. And truthfully, this is a studio that, in my opinion, PlayStation needs. I've talked about it before, but PlayStation just doesn't have enough resources invested into smaller AA games. And Media Molecule is one studio that can deliver on that front. They are very creative, and they can make some of these smaller games that could give them a constant influx of money as long as they can produce high-quality titles. Unfortunately, though, Sony has closed down a lot of their smaller studios in the last 4 years. They closed down Pixel Opus. They closed down Japan Studios, which was a huge blow to their lineup of games. There was also Manchester Studio and most recently London Studio as well. So it does feel like these studios just aren't safe right now, and let's hope that Media Molecule can just kind of pull through and truly deliver a quality experience for their next game. I'm definitely rooting for them. Now, speaking of struggles, though, Sega just admitted that Sonic Superstars did not meet expectations, and to no surprise whatsoever, they indicated that Mario Wonder was the reason why, because their launches coincided. Now this is beyond baffling to me, because I remember saying on this very channel that this was a mistake. A lot of people did. And I just don't understand what Sega was thinking here. This is not the 90s anymore. You're not competing directly with Mario, so there's no need to launch your game side by side. Why not give both of these games time to breathe? The fact is that even though Sonic is a super recognizable IP, Mario is still the more popular franchise, and it will overshadow Sonic to at least some degree if they release side by side, and that's kind of what happened here. I really just don't understand how we as a community can spot something like this, but this multi-billion-dollar company somehow can't. I mean, it is what it is, but Sega definitely makes some weird business decisions. Now, one last thing I want to talk about before I go, and this is for you Battlefield fans out there. I know Battlefield 2042 didn't exactly turn out the way that a lot of people were necessarily hoping it would, but a lot of people are still hoping that the next entry will be the series redemption. Maybe they return Battlefield to its former glory once again, and so far they've been saying a lot of the right things. Sounds like EA is at least listening to the community's feedback, and hopefully they are. But apparently EA's plan is to once again launch the next game with a Battle Royale mode. Now, okay, before you jump to conclusions, it sounds like they will have that more traditional Battlefield experience that fans love so much. So don't worry about that too much for the time being. But if we take a look here, this is coming from Tom Henderson over on Insider Gaming, and he said this. Insider Gaming has also learned that the next Battlefield title is taking somewhat of a back-to-its-roots approach with the likes of 64-player matches, the return of its 4-class system, and an overhaul to its destruction systems. As for the game setting itself, it will be set in the modern day somewhere around 2025 to 2030, with a strong story-driven emphasis on modern technology used in war. That all sounds fantastic to me, and I think the Battlefield community will be very happy to hear that specifically. But yes, he did continue on to say that Ripple Effect, the studio that is working on a new experience for the Battlefield franchise, is working on a new Battle Royale title that's currently aimed to be free to play and follows a similar strategy to the highly successful Call of Duty Warzone that will see the free to play experience tie in with its premium release. So, okay, I mean, the good news here is that this Battle Royale mode is being handled by a completely different studio. So it's not going to interfere with that core experience if that's something you want. If you don't like Battle Royale games, which I personally don't, I think they're boring, that's just my own opinion. But if you just want that more traditional Battlefield experience, it sounds like you very much will have that experience in the next game. And hopefully, it'll end up being good. EA clearly, though, is trying to tap into that mythical cash cow. I mean, we'll kind of see what happens with all this, but it is expected that the next Battlefield will launch next year in October of 2025, or at least it's claimed that's their internal plans right now. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. Again, let me hear your thoughts about the Nintendo lawsuit, but till next time, peace out.